So if it's not already clear, this episode is about bread. And yes, it's every bit as dramatic as I've just portrayed it. More specifically, this episode is about how awesome, cheap, and easy it is to actually make. Baking bread is typically seen as something that is very time intensive, requires a lot of expertise, or is costly. And it can be, but I'm here to show you that it doesn't have to be. I've been baking bread at home for about 2 years now, usually making a loaf every week or two, and after going through the various recipes and methods, I've whittled down the process so it takes as little as 10 minutes of actual work and still tastes good. There are lots of small steps and details you can add to make the exquisite loaf, and I'll mention some that you can add to what I do today. But the template I have will be pretty bare bones, noob friendly, so anyone can capitalize on the amazing phenomenon that is bread. Before I start, I will emphasize, do not be intimidated. This is way easier than you think it is. Okay, so first things first, the ingredients. Here I have 1 bag of all-purpose flour, 1 bag of whole wheat flour, commercial yeast, and some salt. Water is the last ingredient. I recommend unbleached, unbrominated flour. If you get bread flour, that's good too. For the yeast, you can also get an instant dry as opposed to an active dry yeast, which is usually preferable for mixing ingredients right in together like I'm doing, but it doesn't really matter. All of this stuff you should be able to get at your local supermarket. Usually what I use for yeast is my sourdough starter, Boris. Hi Boris. I just fed him, so the bubbles are carbon dioxide that are a byproduct of the fermentation. Making a starter requires 3 to 6 weeks of everyday cultivation, but it's worth it if you make bread every week like I do. I've been sustaining him over a year now, and the conclusion that I've come to is that he is invincible! For the sake of the video, I'll use Boris's commercial counterpart, just so you can see you don't need anything fancy to make good bread. Okay, so for this recipe, I'm making a no-knead whole wheat loaf. As the name implies, it's an unnecessary loaf of bread, so you can skip out on beating it up, or making it at all. Also, the term whole wheat can be misleading, since most whole wheat breads are only a minority whole wheat relative to the total volume of wheat. It's possible to have higher proportions of whole wheat, but it tends not to make for the fluffy goodness that is typically associated with bread. Usually I make my breads around 40% whole wheat, but for this video I'm doing 25% for a more moderate taste and texture. So here I have my large plastic bowl, although stainless steel, glass, or Pyrex will work just fine. Here is 3 cups of all-purpose or bread flour, followed by 1 cup of whole wheat flour. Here is approximately 1 tablespoon of active dry yeast. And here is about half a tablespoon of salt. Usually you want to place the salt opposite the yeast since it inhibits the yeast growth, but it's no big deal. And here I have 1 cup of water and another 3/4 cup of water, so 1 3/4 cup total. And that's it. Now we mix. I'll speed this portion up, but this part only takes about 5 minutes of work, and after you're done, you're already basically halfway finished with making your bread. After you're done mixing, let the dough proof, fancy word for rise basically, anywhere from 8 to 16 hours at room temperature, ideally 65 to 75 degrees, with a towel loosely covering the bowl. I'd recommend closer to 12 hours, which will also let you proof before bed and bake in the morning, or vice versa. If the temperature is much higher than 80 degrees, room temperature I mean, I'd recommend throwing it in the fridge and aiming for the upper ranges of the proofing time. If it's too hot, it won't rise slowly enough, so the fridge will work just fine. It just takes a little longer since the lower temperature slows the yeast metabolism. The long proofing time and higher hydration, which is the percentage of water to wheat, in this recipe allows for the gluten to build up without the use of kneading. Higher hydration doughs are also more difficult to knead, since they're stickier and fall apart easier. But most of all, we can get a similar result with less work, so that's what I'm going for. If you do want to knead, which I recommend doing a few times, decrease the hydration percentage, reduce the proofing time, and have some fun. Alright, so we're finished up here, so I'll cover up the bowl loosely with a towel and put it in a shady place. Now let it proof for about 12 hours. Okay, next morning, let's see what we've got. The top is exposed to air, so it dries out a bit, but the rest of it is still moist and sticks to the inside of the bowl. I'm just going to go ahead here and detach it from the sides with a spoon. Make sure to preheat your oven to 350 before you start. So I'm using an 8 by 4 by 3 approximately loaf pan lined with parchment paper, so I don't have to worry about anything sticking. Alternatively, you can lightly coat the inside of the pan or whatever baking utensil maybe you have with oil, and that works too. If you don't have a loaf pan, don't worry about it. For the first 6 months of baking, I just used a metal baking dish. But if that's all you have, you might want to lower the cooking time a few minutes because the bread will cover more surface area, since it kind of molds into whatever shape you have. So here I'm just lowering the dough in. The bread thing is probably the most satisfying tool I have ever used. The perfectionist in me dies every time I leave scraps or crumbs in a bowl, and this thing perpetuates those tendencies. So that's a good thing, right? And here I shake it up a little bit so the dough fills in the container. So once you're finished up, you can throw it in the oven for 20 minutes at the preset 350. Alright, after 20 minutes we want to up the temperature to 450 and bake it for another 20 minutes about. Don't worry about the time it takes for the oven to heat up to 450. I've kind of included that in the 20 minutes. And I put the timer up here for 15 minutes because I didn't want it to burn. But you'll see in a few clips I just add some more time. Alright, so now that we are waiting for ye olde bread to bake, we can stare at my nasty oven for a while. In the meantime, here are a few things. The single biggest thing that will improve your bake beyond what I've done is to shallowly fill up a heat-resistant pan or baking dish with water and throw it in the oven when you preheat it. This will soften the heat on the bread and give the crust a nicer texture, and overall it'll just bake better. Two warnings here though. When you go to retrieve your bread at the end, beware of the hot steam that will come out of the oven. I've never burned myself on steam, so obviously I can't say, but I imagine it burns my eyes. But seriously, don't play around with steam. It requires an extra phase change to cool down when it comes in contact with your skin, and is usually a higher temperature relative to boiling water. So the burns can be pretty nasty. I mean, seriously, not that that's happened to me, but you still want to be careful. Also, please don't fill up a hot, empty Pyrex dish with room temperature water. Again, this one is obviously not from experience, but it's pretty damn cool to watch the thing collapse in your hands. Lastly, if you have a Dutch oven, you don't have to worry about any of this stuff. I'd recommend baking with it over anything else besides, those fancy baking stones or whatever. For the first 20 minutes, you can use the lid to cover the dough. Some of the moisture in the dough will evaporate, and the lid will catch the steam to have the same effect of steaming the whole oven. For the last 20 minutes, you just remove the lid and increase the temperature, and you'll get a nice brown on your bread. Plus, you get that awesome round, rustic bread shape. Okay, so let's take a look at what we got here. I need a towel. Nope, not one of those. Stupid timer, shut up. Okay, where's the towel? I think I got one over here. Yep, this is my favorite bread towel. Get out of here, trash can, tripod. Okay, so just want to be careful with my hands here. Let's see what we got. Okay, this is looking pretty good, but a little tap there. See how it feels. It's always satisfying to tap that thing. But yeah, I could use a few more minutes, so I'll throw it in for another few here. Alright, so it's been a few more minutes. Let's check it out. And we've already seen this in the Bread-Tage, but yeah, it's looking good. Could use a little bit more browning, I think, but whatever, I'm hungry and I want to eat. So I'll give it a few looks over here. The lighting isn't the best, but here's what we got. One thing that's hard to get with no knead loaf when it has pretty wet dough is the nice hole in the middle there. Normally that's the scoring that's done on dry bread, so I'm pretty happy that it's like this for this one. The hole is where the water vapor escapes, and if it's got good gluten strength, then it'll come through the top like that, which is good for the fact that you have some good strength, but also because it cuts a bit easier and it looks better generally. Alright, just gonna examine my bread over here, see how it feels. You can see it's still nice and spongy, poking it with my finger, but at the same time, check around this side too. At the same time, it's still, I mean, you can't hear the audio here, but the crust is nice and hard too. So I've got a good mix of breads here. But here's for the reveal. Check how the inside is. We want to see, some air pockets. That'll know that we've got some good gluten strength, because if it's holding together well, then it'll hold bigger bubbles. Feels bad, man. No serrated knife. This is a struggle. Come on. Alright, there we go. Alright, it looks pretty good. Yeah, there's some larger bubbles there. You don't want them too big, but also some, just nice color. It's still moist on the inside, and it's got a hard crust. So I'd consider this a success. So we got 4 slices here, 2 savory, 2 sweet. Here's a fig, Miyoko's cheese, and balsamic glaze. Here's a jelly with sesame seed. Here's flaxseed, banana, and vegan Nutella. And then here's an avocado broccoli sprout, homemade broccoli sprout, and arugula. I'd recommend just trying a piece of bread on its own, just to see how it tastes and to be able to get a measure. But I'm going to give this one a bite now. I also like to use it in just like everyday lunches, stews, soups, things like that. But yeah, that one was pretty good. Miyoko's cheese is pretty sick. Alright, well that's what I got for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope I've shown you that making bread is pretty damn easy. Next time I will probably resume the sciencey stuff. So we'll go from there. But yeah, hope you enjoyed it, and have a good bread baking.